Hello and welcome to one of my mini videos. Except this isn't going to be as mini as the rest of them. Let me move myself out of the way so you can see the objectives. Okay, so today what we're going to have a look at is we're going to have a look at task 1 of the IELTS exam. A lot of students tend to rush this task because they feel like it's only 20 minutes, it's 150 words, and task 2 is more important. You shouldn't really rush this task. You should take your time, as in all tasks, but there are some strategies that you should use. You only have 20 minutes for this task and you only have to write 150 words. But those 150 words, you should try and make them count. So that's what we're going to have a look at doing today. So your objectives are to understand how to answer task 1 of the IELTS exam. A lot of students, like I said, rush this, and what they don't do is they don't put a beginning, a middle, and end. All pieces of writing should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So for example, an introduction, a main body, and a conclusion. All your writing should also go full circle. So I'm going to try and draw a circle here. So here at the top, you have your introduction. Then here you have your first paragraph, your second paragraph, maybe even a third paragraph, and a conclusion. But they must all connect. This is my very bad circle. Excuse my circle drawing, but I'm an English teacher, not an artist, so I can have an excuse there. So all your writing, as I've illustrated here, should go full circle. So you should start with an introduction. Your paragraphs should all link, and so should your conclusion. It should all link back to your introduction. That's kind of key when doing any piece of writing. So what I've done today is I've got a line chart ready for you, and what we'll do is we'll have a look at this line chart and see how we can answer a task 1 question. So here we go. All right, so this line chart refers to net migration to the UK between 1975 and September 2016. So what you need to do is firstly read the question. A lot of students, again, don't do that. The question is asking you to summarize the information by reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Now this is very important, where relevant. Why? Because if it's not relevant, don't do it. Only make comparisons where it is relevant to make comparisons. For example, if you've got 2 charts, if you've got 2 sets of data at different points of the year, so in 1995 and 2005, if you're comparing something there, then that's absolutely fine, but only make comparisons where relevant. Okay, so let's have a look at this line graph. It's from the Office of National Statistics. Anyone can Google Office of National Statistics, go on the website and download charts and graphs and pie charts and all sorts of visual data like this in order to help you with your writing for task 1. So Office of National Statistics, just put it into Google, a Google search, and you'll be able to find lots of charts and things like that. Okay, so let's make a start. Okay, so going back to what I said earlier, you need an introduction, you need a main body, and you need a conclusion. So your introduction really should summarize what you can see at a glance. So what do you see when you look at this line graph here? What's it about? So for this particular line graph, it's about net migration. So we can say something like this line graph illustrates, we can say illustrates, displays, identifies, shows, whichever verb you like, net migration to the UK from the year 1975 to September 2016. You could also say this line graph identifies net migration to the UK over a period of 40 years. Okay, and then you could say something, make a statement about this line graph. It is clear at first glance that net migration rose over this period. So you're clearly showing the examiner you can see what is going on instantly in that graph, and that's really important to be able to do that. It's really, really important because it shows the examiner that you have an understanding of what you're writing about. Then we get on to the nitty-gritty bit, which is the main body. Now, again, a lot of students will want to write about every single point in this line graph, and there are a lot of points in this line graph. In fact, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42. There are 42 points in this line graph. It's impossible for you to write about all 42 points within the time frame given and within the word count given. So you have to be selective. Ask yourself some questions. What's the highest point? What's the lowest point? And what anomalies can you see? So what things can you see that look a little bit off? What things look similar? What things look different? Okay, so this is how I would start. Possibly you could start with something like, well, as if you have a look at the bottom, actually, if I show you the bottom axis, you see it here. You have 1975 to 2015. That's a time frame of 40 years. You can't write about every single one of those dates. So what you would probably do is what I have done, is to group it into decades. So I've got the 1970s here, I've got the 1980s here, I've got the 1990s there, and I've got the 2000s. So essentially I can have 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs. You can even do less than that. I mean, it depends how quickly you write. So let's have a look at this. So the first point I made was, one of the main features that I saw was here if we start in the 1970s. So the 1970s saw a general upwards trend in net migration. However, there was a dramatic drop in 1977 and a decline between 1979 and 1981. So here we've got a drop here, which I have mentioned, and I've also mentioned here this drop. Now at this point you could say 1981, in 1981 net migration fell to below was at its lowest point in comparison to 2015, where net migration was at its highest point. You could even mention that in your introduction. So you could say in 1981, net migration was at its lowest point in comparison to 2015, when it was at its highest point. So again, you're just mentioning the most obvious features of this chart. Okay, I would actually put that in my introduction. I would actually put this in my introduction. So where you say, at a first glance, it is clear to see that net migration was at its lowest point in 1981 in comparison to its highest point in 2015. That just again shows the examiner that you know what you're talking about. Okay, so then let's move on to the next main features. Again, because I've looked at it in decades, I'm going through it in decades. So I've finished talking about the 1970s. I'm moving on now to the 1980s. So the 1980s began with net migration at an all-time low. Again, you've mentioned that in your introduction. It's okay to mention it again. But steadily increased to a peak of around 70,000 in 1985. So I'm saying in 1985 here, there was a nice steady increase to a peak of around 70,000 in 1985. After this point, however, it started slowly declining. So it's going down again. it more or less plateaued. So it's going down. And then it more or less plateaued here. It plateaued at around 50,000 between 1988 and 1992. More or less just means around about. Plateaued just means it leveled off. Okay, then I'm moving on. Nothing that I want to write about in particular here, but this is something that I want to mention. So it 1998 here. Sorry, this is something I want to mention here. In 1998, it rapidly rose to 150. You see this? Almost vertical line. It means that it's rapidly rising. If you get an almost vertical line, it means it's rapidly risen. So it rapidly rose to 150,000 and continued on an upward trend. So it does continue on an upward trend, as you can see. It does drop here, but you can mention that later on. But generally, it continues on an upward trend till 2015. And then I've written, so it continued an upward trend, reaching just under 300,000 in 2007. So just under 300,000 in 2007 there. That's a point I want to mention. You can mention about it plateauing between the years 2003 and 2007 to around, again, 300,000 or just under 300,000. But there's another way for you to say this. So you can talk about in the 10 years between 1997 and 2007, net migration almost doubled to just almost doubled from 150,000 to just under 300,000. You can say almost doubled. It's another way of just expressing figures, which the examiners like to see. They like you to talk with fractions and percentages if you can. It just shows the exact. It's another way of paraphrasing the data, which is what examiners like to see. They like to see your use of the English language. Okay, so that's the whole point of this. Okay, so then I said it dropped in 2012 to under 200,000, but quickly recovered, hitting an all-time peak of about 330,000 in 2015. We've talked about this all-time peak here in our introduction. So we said at first glance, we can see that net migration was at its lowest in 1981 compared to its highest in 2015. So we've talked about that all-time peak as well. This is an all-time peak of about 330,000. So that's basically it. That's your main body done. You've described what's going on in the chart without giving too much nitty-gritty detail. Examiners don't want to see that. You should absolutely have a conclusion which expresses, remember what I said right at the beginning, which expresses how things go full circle. So for me, this is what I would say. It is clear from this line graph that net migration rose steadily in the latter part of the 40 years, going up to over 100,000 in 1997 and not reducing below this number. It hit its peak in 2015 at over 300,000. So I'm telling the examiner what I can see in this graph. And in this graph or line chart, I can see that in the later part of the 40 years, net migration was on the up. You could mention the dip here if you wanted to, but for me the most important trend is it goes up to 150,000 around about 1997, and it doesn't go below that 100,000 mark afterwards. You see the 100,000 mark? It doesn't go below that. That's an important feature for me because it starts off well below that in the first half of this 40 years. It starts off well below that. So that's for me is an important thing to note, or it's a main feature. And so therefore I would put that in my conclusion. So you see how I've gone from introducing the main features, what I can see at a glance, on first impressions I can see, and then I've discussed all the things within the main body, all the main features that I can see within the main body, and then I've used my conclusion to talk about this peak and this low here in 1981, and talked about how in the later part of the 40 years net migration, or the trend in net migration, just went up. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at some of the phrases that we used for this, okay, for this particular line graph. So let's have a look at this. Let me get my little green arrow. Okay, so here we talk about a general upwards trend. When I talk about a general upwards trend, I'm talking about what it did in general over the year. So how consistent. General is consistent. Then I talk about a dramatic drop in 1997. A dramatic drop or a rapid rise usually indicates that the line usually is almost vertical. So dramatic, so if we take this as our vertical line, a dramatic drop would be, oh, hang on, let me see. Something like this. It would be dramatic. A slow drop or a steady drop would be like that. So if we take that as our vertical line, dramatic drops are almost vertical. Exactly the same with a rapid rise or a dramatic rise. They are almost vertical. Okay, let's move on. Where's my little green arrow? Okay, so here we go. Between 1979 and 1981. Okay, so here we use between to discuss the time during the period mentioned. So during this period, 79 to 81, so 79, 80, 81, during that 3-year period. We also, I should just mention this preposition in, because a lot of students find prepositions quite difficult. So we've got this preposition in, and we use it to refer to months and years. So in 2000, in 1994, or in September. Then I talked about an all-time low and an all-time high. Note the hyphen between all-time low and all-time here. So again, that's just saying at its highest and lowest points, an all-time low of, an all-time high of. And then we've got steadily increase. So if something goes up steadily, it goes up slowly. Again, here we've got slowly declined, and we talk about things going down slowly. To a peak. When we talk about a peak, we talk about its highest point. And then we've got here more or less. More or less. So here we're talking about an approximation. It's more or less. It's approximately. You estimate. It's around about. Then we can talk about things plateauing. Plateauing just means leveling off. Then we can talk about rose to 150,000. So it went up to 150,000. Again, the opposite of that would be dropped to 150,000. Okay, so here is what I really want you to look at, is almost doubled. It's just another way of saying numbers. So you should absolutely use percentages and fractions as well as the actual data that you've got in there. So there are some, I could give you an example. So you could say something like 1/3 of all men listen to entertainment or watch TV, 45% of, it's important you learn these fractions and these percentages. It's not a lot to learn, but it just shows the examiner that you can paraphrase well. Here we've got quickly recovered, so it got better quickly. And then we've got here hitting an all-time high, getting to the point of a high. Hitting an all-time high is just getting to the point. Again, these are really good collocations, almost doubled. Quickly recovered, hitting an all-time high, hitting an all-time low, all-time high, all-time low. These are good collocations for you to use. Examiners like to see collocations. Examiners like to see paraphrasing. Examiners like to see your ability to use a range of English language. Okay, so that's that for today. No, it's not actually. I've got some phrases down here. So when we are making estimates, we can use the following phrases. So almost, just under, around about, and approximately. These are nice phrases to use when you're talking about numbers, when you don't want to say, or when you're looking at a migration chart like this and you're not so confident about the numbers in between here. You can say it's around about 150,000. It's more or less 150,000. You can use these phrases for approximations to help you do that. It takes the pressure off a bit. So they're quite nice to use as well when we're doing estimates. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. So remember what I said. What you should do is you have an introduction, a main body, summarizing the main features. Summarizing the main features. So you may have 3 paragraphs, and then you have a conclusion. And all these things must interconnect with one another. Don't lose sight of using discourse markers, and don't lose sight of using PPF. PPF just means past, present and future, but past perfect, past simple, past continuous, present simple, present continuous and present perfect, and future will and conditionals with if. You don't always need conditionals with if in task 1, but you can absolutely certainly use the present perfect in task 1. You can also use the passive to say it is clear. No, you cannot. So you can just use those different tenses. It's really, really important that you do that in task 1. It's really, really important that you use collocations, and some of the collocations that I've showed you here are quite nice ones, and if you can try and memorize them, do your best. Almost doubled, quickly recovered, all-time high, all-time low, hitting. These are nice collocations for you to try and remember when you come to writing your task 1. I'll do another task 1 because unfortunately you don't always just get a nice graph. You do get sometimes you do get comparisons, and you do get a processes diagram, which has to be approached a little bit differently. It has to be approached using the passive. It's just better, it looks better, and it shows the examiner that your understanding is really good. So hopefully I will get that done for you for next session, and I hope this has been useful. If you've got any questions, remember to just send me a message. You can always email me, and I'll see you next time. Take care and bye.